say. Because of the sensitivity of the topic, we are going to look over the video before we post it. And if you say anything that we feel is going to get you in trouble down the road, then we'll edit it out. But try to be careful and be mindful that this is going to be recorded and posted on YouTube. Please keep your microphones muted. You can put your questions in the chat and we will go through those periodically as well. And with that, I would like to introduce our panel. Our panel is Alicia Ake, Annette Coffey.
Good morning.
Susie Bracken.
Good morning.
And Tracy Patari. Guys, I can't spot. Here we go. And then your moderator, the lovely Emily Horn.
Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. Again, all of you ladies I got to see last week. This is such a treat to get to see you on Zoom. I'm thrilled to be moderating again in this important and I think very popular topic about employment contracts, especially as it regarding AEs and other key staff. And I just want to set the stage for this conversation and really, create some framework for us, because as Peggy said, this can be a sensitive topic anytime you're talking about anything that has legal ramifications or contracts, of course, and we're not lawyers and we intend to give no legal advice today. So the intention of this conversation is just for your colleagues, these AE colleagues, to share some best practices concerning like the process that revolves around a contract and the renewal process. Also just some pros and cons to having or not having an employment contract in place, because not everyone does. And so nothing that's disadvantageous to the association or the AE. We're really just talking about some mutually beneficial pieces of employment agreements or contracts for AEs. So we will just consider that, even if as an audience member, as you're asking your questions, make sure we're not talking about anything specific to salary amounts or specific benefits. What we don't want to say is, oh, well, my board does this for me. We don't want to get into those kind of specifics. It's really going to be more general conversation. So I hope everyone is on board with that, and we'll just mitigate that as we go if we get into a gray area. And of course, like for questions that will come up that inevitably will about legal related questions, you should of course consult your association attorney and or a labor law expert or attorney. Okay, so that's my little PSA before we start. So we'll get right into it. And we have a poll, because I just, out of curiosity, I'm curious to know from our attendees who has and doesn't have a employment contract in place with their association. So my good colleague Nick, I think, is going to launch that first poll that simply just asks everyone that. So it'll just kind of give us some context where everyone's at. So Nick, would you mind launching that first one? I'll give you a few seconds to take a look at that. All right, Nick, and I'll let you decide when you get most of the results in. You can feel free to post the results for everyone to see. Okay. Wow, that's really distinct. 75% do have employment contract in place, and then 25% of you said no, I do not. All right, that helps us kind of know who we're talking to. Thank you. Okay, so just for context for this panel, can you each tell us, and I'll start with Alicia just because you're in the left of my screen, do you have an employment contract in place, and maybe why or why not?
I do, and I do because that's what our board has always done. And I think it's important to have that contract in place so that there are very clear guidelines of what the expectations are of me and my board.
Awesome. And Annette?
Yes, I do have an employment contract in place. When I first started with East Valley, the first few years I did not. And then we negotiated a contract and went from there. So I've had one for the past 8 or 9 years, I guess.
And what was the catalyst to getting that in place? Was it you coming to your board and saying, hey, I feel like we need some mutual expectations set?
You know, it's mutual, but it was probably more on my side. It's like when you're changing your leadership every year and your president every year, we need to both understand and have some commitments to each other.
Mhm.
And so that's where it all came out. And it was really, it was a great process for both sides. I really thought there was no negative aspects of negotiating besides maybe that little bit of uncomfortableness coming forward and saying, we need to talk about this.
Absolutely. I think you bring up a really good point that we will dive into about that mutual commitment piece.
Mhm.
And then it's setting the expectations within that, I think really helps, especially with the nature of the leadership in organized real estate changing so frequently. Susie, what's your situation?
There was an employment contract in place when I started. It's very legalese. I have made some minor changes to it over the years. I would say that it's never been looked at since I was hired, probably by certainly not the full board, perhaps a president or two, but more so what I think is more important than the contract that I've done a lot of work on over the years through my own mistakes, actually, is the process, which we'll get into.
Yes, absolutely. It's all about the process and the details of that. And Tracy, tell us about your situation. I assume you do have an employment
I do have a contract. I've always had a contract, even when I was with a small association. I think because it was the thing to do at the time. So the board kind of did that. I think it helps set at least the higher level of expectations of what they expect from me and what I expect from them, which can help with misunderstandings. Because occasionally I found I've had to refer back to my contract when they want to do certain things. And it's like, well, if we're going to do that, then we have to renegotiate, or this is how things are supposed to work. I think it helps set those expectations, which hopefully end some issues that might start up because you've got the expectations set.
Absolutely. And so with that, and I like how you're saying the expectations, because not only does that outline typically benefits and salary and all those like key components, but I know for me as a former AE, we always had an addendum or to the contract that had my actual job description as an AE, because it's all really within those expectations of like what's expected of you in your role. Do you have that as well, Tracy, since you're bringing that up?
Yes, I do have the addendum. I do have the job description on it. It needs revamping because basically the job description, if anybody pulls one of the standards from NAR, you're everything. I mean, the expectation is you are everything to every person. So if I was, for those of you who don't know, I'm done at the end of this year with the association here, but if I was in the process of renegotiating a contract, I would definitely do a little bit more renegotiation on those job duties, because I think it really is important to set those expectations. What do you want from me? And what do I want from you, so that there's no misunderstandings moving forward? It really does help with that communication with your board. And especially if some person brings something odd up and you're going, well, okay, I didn't know I was supposed to be doing that. Or on the flip side, the board saying you're supposed to be doing this and you're not, and you can deal with that from the beginning before it blows up into something worse.
Absolutely. So you bring up some great points about there's a job description is great when you create the contract and until it's like outdated or till it changes, and you want to make sure that there's a process in place to actually update that job description, maybe even on an annual basis, because you do want it to be up to date for those new leadership that are coming in and really need to understand what your responsibilities are. Annette, what's your process for updating your job description as part of your contract?
Actually, you brought up a good point, because I was like, you know what, I don't do that annually. And there's probably a lot of changes that have been made from the original contract, because my contract, we don't want to go into a lot, but my contract is probably a longer term than most contracts.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't done it annually, and I need to. It's probably one of those things that I've never had an issue, but you never do until you do. So
Right. And it's just something to rest on,
it's
to
something
say,
I need to update.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think I don't think I had that process in place when I was an AE. I can't remember that I did. It's like something that you do once and you kind of one of those things you forget about unless you have that process or, you know, some timeline for that.
I do have an updated one, which is interesting for the other two, you know, so negotiating those agreements, I have an updated one, but I never looked back on my original and said, oh, we need to update this. So
I would say typically year to year, there's probably not a lot of significant changes unless, you know, you really grew exponentially and you have a bigger staff and your role just maybe was elevated in different ways. But I do think, does anyone have a practice where you sit down with your new president, your incoming president, and talk, or personnel committee if you have one, or executive committee, or whatever body is kind of responsible for you and your performance reviews? Do you sit down and kind of go over your contract, job description, any of that on an annual basis? Anything like that?
during
No.
the review, we do, not to probably the details of the job description, but we do go through different aspects of the job, obviously during the review process. So I think that's probably, but that's usually 8 months into my year with my new president. So, but they are part of the previous one. So I do have like an executive team. I do not have a personnel committee. I don't ever want to experience that, honestly, compared to what I've heard from other associations, but I do have an executive team that meets, and then it goes before board of directors. But I kind of like this annual review of the job description. That's something I will look at when, you know, in my spare time.
Good. We always get more work from any session we all attend, I know. Alicia, since you are maybe the newest, I think AE are the newest of this group in particular, what were some, without getting into specifics, of course, what were some of the key aspects of your job description that were most important to you when you came on first as an AE?
Well, my job description itself, Peggy did a fantastic job with my job description before she left our association. And then Andrew added a little bit more after she left. So my job description is like 4 pages long. So
and I think I misspoke. I mean, your contract in general, like your employment agreement.
So obviously the salary was important to me and what the benefits were, but it was really important to me to know what was going to happen if the relationship between me and our association dissolved. What were they allowed to do? What am I allowed to do? And what were the consequences for not doing it the right way? That's what was important to me.
That departure piece is such an important part for both parties, right? For you as an AE and for your employment, and then also for the entity itself, and knowing kind of how that transition can work, and to best kind of plan for that, even if it's, you know, unexpected. Let's see. So Susie, can you talk about the process that happens at your association when your contract is up for renewal? What takes place? Does your contract dictate that, and what has to happen in a timeline? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. And I can't stress the importance more of having a process. So, and I, you know, put that in your policies for your board, actually. So what we do is, of course, the president has the option of coming up with a review committee. It's generally the president, past president, and the vice president. And then what they do is I fill out, I do sort of an evaluation document or review document that's sent to the whole board actually to look at. And they do, we won't get into this as much, but we do they do like a scoring through a survey tool. And then after that, that smaller group meets with the AE briefly and to discuss the results of that. And then I think that at that time is the important part where the AE, which I've learned, it should basically ask for any type of increase that they, you know, are expecting. Any talk about goals, accomplishments, improvements, all that kind of stuff. And then the committee goes into the executive session and then comes back, the AE is invited back, at which point, you know, there's room for discussion. this is so important, I think, and it's something that my board has not followed since the onset of the Zoom meetings. So what happens twice now is that we meet ahead of time, they go to executive session, I leave the Zoom, and then what's happened is they just, rather than inviting me back, they come in, or rather the president ends the meeting and calls me and says, okay, here's what we decided. So that is not in the policy. And I'm going to make sure that this year they come back and face to face tell me what that they are, planning to bring forward to the board as far as any expected, changes or, whatever it is. And then at that point, he has an opportunity to respond. There also, of course, in another portion, this is actually in my contract itself, it talks about how if there's anything unsatisfactory, the president needs to describe that in detail in writing, because I had a situation where one year there was some stuff, mentioned, but there was no examples. So I couldn't learn from that. So now they are supposed to actually come up with, something in writing. And then if the AE disagrees with the evaluation, there's also an opportunity to respond back in writing.
So what I'm hearing from you, so this is obviously what, in large part, what your annual performance review looks like. Does that mean that your contract is do you have a 1-year term for your contract, and that's why your contract's always up for renewal in conjunction with your performance review?
Yes, and actually it's not so much the contract that gets looked at, it's the addendum that you've talked about.
The performance. So let's make some distinctions here, because I think that's important piece that you brought up, is that the annual performance review, of course, your salary, your benefits, and your whole package is largely usually based on, and the renewal process is largely based on performance, right? And merit increases and things like that. But your performance review specifically has to be conducted every year, and that's mandated by core standards, right? And whereas your employment contract may not be, and often isn't, an annual term. So that might be a 3-year term or a 2-year term. It doesn't mean you wait for your performance reviews to coincide with that renewal. You have to have those annual performance reviews regardless. I think the contract renewal is a little different than your performance review. They may be connected, and they should be, I would think, because you want to show what a great job you did upon your renewal, and hopefully come to some terms that you find reasonable and agreeable to you and the board. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of make that distinction for those who are kind of listening. So you gave a really good overview of what your performance review looks like. And I think you brought up another point about the negotiation part. I think, to me, a good negotiation is when both parties are just like a little unhappy at the outcome, right? That doesn't always happen, because that's where you get to the compromise. But Annette, can you talk about the negotiation process? Not in details, but just kind of how that happens, because I think this is where process really matters, because having the whole board, like what Susie just described, sounds really challenging to have the whole board kind of go like separately, and not have this like smaller body to work with and actually have that like negotiation itself. Annette, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, but I will say that I feel like I'm blessed because my process, we didn't have, well, maybe they weren't happy, I don't know, but the process was very simple for me. When I came in with the initial request that, hey, I think I've proven myself, we need to have some kind of agreement so that every year I'm not wondering if I'm going to continue being an association executive for you. So yeah, that first initial process probably was the most uncomfortable. But the minute I said it, they're like, oh yeah, that's great. We want to make sure that we're secure as well. So it really became a win-win on both sides. And then my negotiations for renewal have always been initiated by them prior to my contract expiring. So they come in and say, we want to negotiate with you right now to extend your contract. And so that's why I feel like I'm blessed, because I don't have that experience that maybe some of the other AEs have. Mm-hmm. And then when I do with the other associations that we're helping out with, that's a management agreement. I think people get confused with what I'm doing, but that's a management agreement with East Valley. And that
Mhm.
negotiation is also, I have to negotiate what my agreement is, my work there, and what my extension or my contract will be with that work that I'm doing for another organization. So I honestly, I've done this a lot recently, but that it's all because of this unique opportunity that we've had for these management agreements.
Yes, you have a very unique situation. I think a lot of people would love to dig into separately about, how that all works when you manage
Right,
multiple
so-
associations.
So one contract with East Valley for a period of time. Those management agreements don't necessarily tie to that. If one is asking for longer than the period of time that I have with East Valley, then at that point, then I negotiate directly with East Valley. So because I don't want to have agreement with East Valley that it would expire prior to an agreement maybe with another organization. Does that make sense? So that,
Yes.
because the management agreement is with East Valley from another association, but part of the wording in that contract is my name is in there.
I was just going to say, so that makes a lot of sense. So the dotted line from those other two associations, California Desert and then for Inland Valleys in your case, go to is a management
Inland
agreement.
Gateway.
What did I say?
Inland Valley.
Oh my gosh, Inland
That's
Gateway.
okay. That's okay. Just want to make sure people don't get confused.
Thank you, Tiger. Yes, and got it. So that's a really unique situation. I know we have one other. I know Pacific West has some management agreements, and it's a very unique situation. I applaud you for kind of being creative, and that I know that opportunity it kind of came together. But
It came to me. Yeah, I did.
You've navigated it really well, and it's kind of a nice model for for future potentially for other associations that may pop up. Tracy, what is your process for your contract renewal as it is now?
So my contract has an automatic renewal clause in it. So it automatically renews for a year under the same terms and conditions, unless something is done to stop that renewal. And there are notice requirements. So and it's up to me to give the notice, which makes perfect sense because we can't expect the president to give the notice that the contract's going to be renewed. So it gives the time frame. So I actually notify the president saying, hey, I have to give you this notice as required in my contract, that it will automatically renew for 1 year. That opens up the discussion for should it continue more than 1 year? Should we renegotiate a different term? Then terms that are in there. So that all starts that process. And I think it's really worked well for us, except for this year when I said, here's your notice, forget it. I was nicer than that. But so it really does open up that whole discussion about contracts, and it makes it so that I'm not coming at them wanting more. It's, hey, I have to do this according to the terms of my contract. I am putting you on notice that this contract will automatically renew under the current terms and conditions. And it really does open up that conversation.
Awesome. And you have a unique experience to be sharing because like what you said, and I think if anyone missed it, Tracy has announced that she's going to be leaving her association at the end of this year. We're going to miss you dearly. And that was all the way that you're departing, and the notice that you're giving is all per your agreement, right?
Yes.
Your contract.
Yeah,
So-
I gave them plenty. I gave them a lot more notice than required because it's an amicable separation. So I gave them lots of notice that I was leaving.
And I think that that's exactly, you're playing out what we were talking about earlier, is that departure piece and how to amicably do that. And I think that is one real pro of having a contract in place. Alicia, who is responsible for what body or person or group is responsible for your contract renewal, and how does that look at your association?
So I haven't had to go through a renewal yet because I just signed my contract to take the position permanently. But when that process happened, I worked directly with my president, and then she would take it back to the executive committee. And then once the executive committee and I were done negotiating, the board just voted on it and agreed to it, and it was done.
Awesome. And I think it's so important to just know to have a defined process. I can't emphasize that enough. I think far too often you might have a contract, or associations have a contract that gets, maybe forgotten until the 3 years that it's up or 2 years that it's up or whatever. And then there's no process behind it and the whole board gets involved. And I think that's when things can get really dicey, because when you have a whole board of directors, just like you saw for C.A.R, we had 800 directors. Can you imagine if they were really renegotiating an employment contract as a body? It's really important to have a process that really works for your association. Maybe that means a specific like executive committee group, which is like your president-elect, your treasurer, who has authority of the board to negotiate, with like the ratification still being the board's responsibility. There's lots of different ways to cut this. In fact, I think NAR has a lot of resources, which we can send you a link to that area on NAR's website after this webinar, because there's just a lot of different ways to cut it. And I think, again, that's important policy to have in place of how that contract renewal happens and who has the authority to act on behalf of the board to negotiate with you. Okay, I see some questions in the chat. Again, I just want to reiterate that we're not going to be talking about percentages, dollar amounts, specific benefits. And I know you guys bring up some really good points. What about inflation? That all is connected to salary. And I don't want to get into bonus structures or anything like that. And this is because C.A.R is facilitating this particular session. If you on your own want to have conversations like that, that's totally up to you. But I just want to walk that line carefully, because C.A.R is facilitating this, and we do have to be, you know, give equal. We don't want to disadvantage the boards by talking about what's more advantageous for the AE and vice versa. So we're staying in that neutral zone. So I'll try to like maybe, and Peggy, if you want to kind of take some of these elements that are in the chat, and if there's any neutrality that we can talk about these items without, you know, being too specific, I'm happy to do that. I'll let you think about that.
Emily, the
Okay.
one thing that I
Yeah.
do have in my contract is who does my performance evaluation. I don't think that should be a moving target.
Absolutely.
I don't
And
think it'd be executive committee 1 year and then random people the president selects for the next year that are not involved. And policies can be changed by the board at any time. They can't change my contract without my consent.
That is a really, really, really good tip. Because policies, like you said, board to board, and we know that some years are better than others, depending on who makes up that board of directors and maybe how experienced they are, and lots of factors. But, and you're the constant at the association, the AE is the constant, and you do need to, I think that's a huge benefit of having not only an agreement, but what you just said, Tracy, to have that, the authority dictated within your contract of what body is responsible for that performance review year to year. Because I've experienced a challenging situation at a former association I worked for, where it was a personnel committee. And like Annette said, it's nothing I would ever recommend. There's like this, I think, perceived power that this group kind of felt. And it kind of it hung over my head sometimes about, and there was a different personnel chair year to year that was just appointed by the president. So we eventually changed that process, which was very hard to do. So if you can get that within your contract, which is a real constant and not something that can be easily changed by the board, I think that's really, really huge. Okay. Anything, I'd love to know what's most important to you all out there attending. So in terms of different aspects that we've talked about in an employment contract, which of course is salary, it's benefits, your duties, your job description. It also often includes travel, what business travel looks like and what the association is committing to. It could talk about like any equipment that you are given to do your job, like a cell phone, and what they're covering. This is all part of the package often. So I'm gonna have Nick put up our second poll, and we just wanna know what's most important to you. If you have to just pick one, and I know, look, all of these are important, but what you had to say, what is the most important piece of your contract? We'll give you a second to answer that. All right, we're almost there. Okay. Nick, you can go ahead and end the poll and share the results. And it looks like half said salary, and then it was kind of split on vacation, health and wellness benefits, job duties was also under there, and then other. Yes, you're right, Liz. We didn't say separation terms, which we alluded to earlier, but that might have been one of the others that someone said. So awesome. I think that's actually surprising. I mean, I think salary would be the logical choice that most people, but I think in today's world, although that's very important and a reality of having a living, there's just so much more that we're all looking for, I think, from our careers that we spend so much, maybe more time doing than time with our family in some cases. So I think in the health and wellness piece is a really big one. Okay, I think there was a good question in the chat about Kim Hansen asked generally who does the AE review. Just who wants to jump in there and say who is the body, who are the people that do your annual review?
My contract says officers of the association.
And does that qualify as treasurer, president-elect, and president? And if you're the secretary?
It's the top 5. So it's our treasurer, secretary, president-elect, president, and then past president.
Okay, so you have 5 officers. Got it.
President
Yes.
on mine takes the lead, but then you do president-elect, past president. And treasurer is not required, but often will be there.
Awesome. And past president, got it.
Mine is exec, which is president, president-elect, first vice president, treasurer, and somebody I'm missing. And the makeup of our executive committee is stated in our bylaws. And then in my contract, it states who does my review is the executive committee. So it's pretty locked down.
Great. All the dots are connected there.
Yeah, I'm trying to connect the dots.
But visually how these all
Those moving
intersect.
dots.
Yes, yes. The like an org chart sorts for your contract. Okay, how long are most for contracts? Does everyone want to just share, Alicia, what is the term of your contract? How many years?
So I signed a 3-year contract with an automatic 1-year renewal.
Okay.
So every year it'll roll over like Tracy's.
Anyone else comfortable sharing their term? I think it's pretty mundane in terms of the term.
I have a 5-year contract.
5 years. Got it. And Tracy,
Mine's
what'd you
3
say?
at my request.
And Susie?
I'm not even positive. I think it's a 1 year. But again, because of the fact that we don't often even look at the contract year to year, I'm pretty sure it's 1 year.
That's something to consider. I bet after this call, you're gonna know all about it.
Well, one of the things that I am curious about with others, I don't know if it's time to do this, but I have an addendum that talks about, what's happened in the changes in the contract that are made from year to year. That has been provided to my review committee each year. I don't know if that's such a good idea. I was just curious whether others had done that, because it could be to benefit to show, okay, here's the history of the raises and, bonuses or whatnot. But it could also be, that they just follow whatever the previous review committee has done. So I'm not sure that's such a good thing to do, but the contract itself does have, contain an addendum with the history of the previous increases and changes to the contract, whether it be benefits or whatever.
I would say that's pretty atypical. My just knowing to have it included in the contract itself. I think separately, it's important to give, if the body who is part of the contract renegotiation or renewal would like some historical information. I think that's, totally appropriate to share with them. But I think those specifics are typically not within the contract, because you really want that contract you want it a little cleaner and just really stating the agreement between parties versus historical information.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I'm out of questions except for really important ones. I think when you are renegotiating your contract, especially, and obviously salary is a big part of that, those compensation comps are really helpful and really, really hard to provide because of I think the nuanced nature of this role and in organized real estate. And believe it or not, I tried my best to have one conducted by C.A.R. I tried to hire 2 different vendors. One of them actually is from N.A.R. because they do have an arm that does some of this, but they couldn't handle all of California. It was too large. You can, as an association, and I know most of you don't have budgets for this, can hire N.A.R. to do some salary compensation survey for you in your particular geographic area. And I think they look at other sectors, obviously, not just real estate, for association management similar related roles. But we'll keep trying. It's been very hard to find a vendor who will do it. But I do have a budget for it, and I hope I can do that for you all this next year when we have more staff resources to kind of source that. I know N.A.R. has done one. I think the most recent one I want to say was 2018, and I do have that, and I've given that out to presidents and you. It's available to anyone. But I realize that is a big challenge to not offer some comps when we're negotiating that, and really especially in California. And that I will say that's the problem with N.A.R.'s data, is that we know California is so special. We pay so much money for this great weather and great state that we get to live in, that it is exponentially the living costs and everything is exponentially higher. And so, the N.A.R. data you kind of have to take with a grain of salt because it includes all of the nation. And obviously it's not all similar shapes and sizes. Okay, Peggy, I'm gonna ask the panel, is there anything else you'd like to share about anything we've talked about or haven't talked about that you think might be helpful for our audience?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in.
Oh, sorry, Susie. Go ahead.
Okay,
I think this is a good time, Emily, to jump in and tell you that I did speak to the N.A.R. HR people when I was in Chicago this year. And one of the important things I learned was that it should be stated either, they said, in your job description, not necessarily your contract, whether or not you are an exempt or an hourly employee. And the reason this is important, especially for California, is that the California Labor Code states that exempt workers should be paid double the minimum wage. This was something, by the way, pointed out to me by my colleagues. Thank you, Alicia and Beth, who are on this call. And because of that, I was able to do a mid-year renegotiation of my contract. So it's something important to know. And you can go, we actually hired a lawyer, but you can go easily and just find out what does that mean? What are the qualifications to be an exempt employee? It's something super important that I don't think our boards know about. And in my case, did have an impact on salary and past wages. So that exempt hourly should be what I was told in your job description somewhere.
That's a great point to talk to your association attorney or whomever is the legal guidance that you're using to write your contract or advise on your contract or advise the association. Tracy, you wanted to mention something.
The one thing I want to make, because I saw your poll and I was an other. And I was an other because my contract clearly states that hiring and firing of all staff is mine and mine alone. That way I can protect my staff or remove a staff person, and the board or members have no say. Now, obviously, if I go through, cutting everybody's head off, that comes back to me in my performance evaluation. But when it comes to staff, we all know that some staff have great relationships with others. They may, and it's really saved me a number of times where I can just point out, nope, this is my decision per my contract. And usually the board members understand that they have to follow my contract. But having say over staff is just crucial for me because I need my team to be my team.
And that will come up again and again and
Yep.
again, because different leadership come in, and even with good intentions, they just make assumptions sometimes incorrectly about kind of what governing versus managing means. And that
Right.
management piece is all the AE and the staff, and it trickles down to the staff, and that includes the hiring and firing. And I think there are lots of good legal reasons why they don't want to get involved in the hiring and firing as well. But we all know that sometimes it is just all too tempting for your directors to swerve into that management lane. And I think it's really important what you just said, because
I've had them want to develop and tell me what the hiring committee should be for a new staff person, which if anybody touches any sort of HR, you're very afraid of what a realtor will ask a potential hire in any sort of interview, because it's pretty, you can really get yourself in trouble.
And this
so
is where
yeah.
Bring the attorney, tell them why it's such a bad idea. And I know personal stories of some of you who have gone through this, where the board wanted to interview the hire at a small association because they've always done it that way. And it's a really bad practice for all the reasons. You're right, Tracy, this is where your value, your unique value of being trained in these areas, including HR. You don't have to be an HR expert, but I know many of you are very well versed in some of those basic HR do's and don'ts to keep you out of hot water and your association out of hot water. And this is where you really prove your value of, like, you want this barrier because you don't want to get the association in trouble. Let me, I'm trained, I've been, educated on this. Let me handle this, and our staff who are also trained. Okay, I'm just looking at the chat a little bit to see if there are any other questions. I do want to say, I think one of my biggest challenges as an AE, especially in renegotiation of contracts, is that you are dealing with, whether it's whatever body it is, whether it's the whole board, hopefully not, whether it's a group like officers, like Alicia said. Often what I think is really important is making sure that they have the right information, data to make decisions that work within the framework that you live in. So for instance, if the market is really bad out there and they're not making any money, sometimes they need to be reminded that this is a whole different job than they have. And it doesn't mean you're insensitive to that, it matters, but they have to really leave that hat at the door and really come in with a perspective of, this is a business that you run, and it's a whole different industry in a way, maybe not industry, but profession than what they live every day. Your profession is association management, and theirs is realtor. And I think sometimes being able to gently remind them of kind of those different boundaries and kind of nuances of those different professions is really important. It's hard to do, but it's important, especially as the market fluctuates, and so does their income at times too. So okay, and so I want to give the audience any time to ask questions, or Peggy, if you want to jump in with any questions you've received directly that you want to make sure is answered.
I didn't get any directly, but I would like to hear from some of the AEs who do not have a contract and find out how that works for them, and if they feel like they're missing out because they don't have one, or they're glad they don't have one, or what the pros and cons are of that.
Love that. So we'll let you think on that if anyone wants to be brave enough to come forward to talk about that. But in the meantime, I think Elizabeth had a question. Hi.
Hi. Well, I have a question, but I'll also answer Peggy's question very briefly. So I do not have a contract, and it's not a concern for me, but I think it varies very much depending on your personal circumstances. Took this job at the end of my career, and I am not dependent on this financial income for my livelihood. And I've worked in positions where I had a contract before and ended up terminating my employment. So, a contract, you have to remember, in California, we are an at-will state. That said, I think that it probably, if I was in a larger association or was projecting a longer term in this career, I would want a contract because certain things are not spelled out when you don't have a contract. And the question I had in the chat pertains to that, and I'll just ask it, and maybe we can keep on Peggy's question. If anyone has an answer for my question, they can throw it in the chat. My question had to do with the fact that my exec committee, of course, changes every year, and my bonus, I usually get some type of bonus, but it's not tied to any metrics. So sometimes the bonus might be tied to things like, did you meet core standards? Sometimes it might be tied to budget performance, which I think is interesting because there are things in budget performance that we as AEs don't control at all. For instance, no travel because of COVID. So It's been a concern of mine, but I've been really unable to identify what I think those metrics should be. But it seems that it's very arbitrary in my personal case. But that would be the reason. And my bonus isn't a standard percentage of my salary. That's either I get it all or I get nothing. It's really the board looking at the overall picture of how they feel my performance was throughout a year. But that, I think I answered Peggy's question and asked my own. So answer mine in the chat and we'll stay on Peggy's. But that's the reason I personally don't have a contract. But I would recommend that anyone have one. It just doesn't, I don't feel I need it at this time in my life.
And I think just regarding bonuses, I'd prefer not to really go into that structure because I think that really that has a lot to do with your salary and details of that. But I do encourage you to ask, you know, other association execs if you feel comfortable to kind of get ideas on how you might be able to propose different options to your board that they may be in agreement to adopt that might work better for both of you.
And if anyone would like to send me that, just don't send me any numbers. I'm only asking for if there are particular metrics and what those are. I'm not asking for any numbers.
And I think this goes back to process and practice, right? I mean, this is all about perfecting, or maybe it's never perfect, but just really digging into what that process looks like, what the expectations are, all of that surrounds it, because that is going to make the difference. Okay, Sarita, you have a comment or question.
So yes, hi everyone. I do not have a contract. As everyone knows, my predecessor was at the association for 40 years, so I'm not even sure if contracts are in place at that point. I am not sure if I am okay with or without having one, honestly. I guess a little bit of security for me is knowing that all of my board members would have to vote whether I stay or go, and just not my executive committee, only because I've been in situations where my executive committee, you know, we didn't see eye to eye, but then things did turn around. So that was a good thing. But another thing that I was also asking about is for those who don't have contracts, how do we introduce it to our boards if this is something that they've never heard about or never had to experience before in the past? How do we introduce that to them without them feeling like, well, what is this for? We've never done this before, you know, because I feel like it would throw them into a frenzy.
That is a great question. Any panelists want to answer that, how they would approach that?
The one thing is, and I don't know if it says it in your bylaws, check it, but my bylaws say that the board of directors can hire, not the executive committee. So unless the board of directors gives that power to the executive committee can't fire me. Only the board of directors can fire me.
But in terms of if say you don't, for AEs that don't have a contract, but they want to.
That's probably still in your bylaws, that it's the board of directors hires. That's the standard language in the bylaws.
I think we're talking about best approach here. Like who,
To
like best
introduce
way to
them
bring
to
it
a
up.
contract.
I always said it's to protect the association and myself, because it really does protect both parties having a contract. I firmly believe.
You know, sometimes I think that no matter how much information, facts, experience you can bring, sometimes they need to hear it from another party, and I mean they by your leadership. Sometimes they need to hear it from a third party, like a lawyer or another maybe AE or association they respect. Any other creative ideas on how to approach it to have the best outcome when bringing this up to your board and hoping that they can come to the table?
Are you going to do your little president's roundtables again, your get-togethers?
Are you talking about the president's town hall? The
president's town hall meetings? That might be a really nice time to have the conversation. And
potentially,
you know, Otto could easily address it as I think it should be a member and not another AE discussing the pros of having a contract.
Yeah, I mean, C.A.R. definitely wouldn't be in the position to say we recommend it, because that's not advice that we give. But certainly like a panel of kind of like what we're doing here, but on the president's level, that would be a little bit different context, and questions could be an option. Anyone else have anything for Sarita, who I give you credit, Sarita. I get it. It's hard. It's a hard conversation to have, and it's an important one.
Yeah, I think it's true. I believe it's all timing. You've got that relationship that you have with that president. If you go, okay, this is the time to bring this. If you got a very close relationship with somebody where there's a mutual respect, that might be your best time to bring that forward. As I said, I didn't have one when I first started and didn't even really consider that at the time. I know I had to prove myself, and I know you've been there long enough to do that, Sarita. So I would definitely, if you, whether it's this year, if you got that really great relationship, or if you see one next year, I would start that conversation early and say, this is one of my goals for the year, so that it starts them thinking about it, and then bring it forward after that. But you do need to introduce it yourself. They don't, honestly, they just don't think that way. They're independent contractors. They don't have those employee relationships. A lot of times they just don't understand that, unless you have maybe a large brokerage or something that might have some employees, but it's something that they just don't even think about. So you're going to have to go that extra step to get them started.
Absolutely. Drip it, drip, drip, drip.
Yeah, exactly. Don't come in hard. Come in, do your soft sell first.
And I like what you said. This is a goal of mine, because there's nothing to hide about it. It's an advantageous. I think there's lots of arguments that we've made today that why and how it can be advantageous for both parties. And so just talking about, like, that's really a goal of mine. I think that mutual commitment is really important to me and to the organization. I want continuity. I want to have mutual expectations, and let's work toward, I'd love to work towards this. And then keep talking about what that could look like. I think that's
and sometimes it can come right after your review. If your review is like stellar, they come in to do a review after you get your review, then you come in a little bit later, give that a little time to settle, and come in and say, I really appreciate the review, and I'd like to discuss how this could benefit both of us.
Love
And
that.
Sarita, I would also, don't personalize it. This is something that you're going to do for the good of the association and the AEs ahead of you. So it really is not about you. It's about, you as an AE are helping the association, provide documentation for the future, and that's a lot of what we should be doing, is making sure that our HR stuff is in place for future.
Right, so we won't fall into this another 40 years, just in case I'm there that long.
Yes, Susie, that's a really great point too. And I think it speaks to the continuity and the commitment of both, that you care enough about the association too, to make sure that continuity is there for not only yourself, but ongoing. Okay, I think we have time for one more question, then I'll hand it off to Peggy to close. Sylvia, hi.
Good morning. I unfortunately missed the whole first half of this meeting due to somebody stopping in, but I do not have a contract, and it has raised questions. I was actually told I was going to have a contract when I first started. I was also told I was going to be salary when I first started, and I don't have either of those. I'm hourly, I'm single staff, I don't have a contract, and certain issues have arose because of it. And I have a supportive exec committee that does my review, so they do all the hiring and firing. However, I feel like because those exec committees change, year after year, you're getting somebody else new in, it leaves a lot of room for personal opinions to maybe get in the way. Not necessarily right now, but if one person comes in and just maybe doesn't quite like how you're doing something, then I don't know. I just have concerns about not having one.
Yeah, and I think even contract or not, I think process is where, and policy is where that's going to be important for you at the association. So, and I know there's a lot of elements we talked about, but you can have a policy, and you should have a policy of how your renewal happens, or if you don't have a contract, even your performance review, all of that should be in a policy so that you don't feel like what you're sharing so vulnerable to it just changing on a dime depending on who's coming in. That's also important for that continuity piece and your security, and feeling like you understand what should transpire.
I feel like a contract it not only protects yourself in a way, but also it protects the association for those mishaps that could potentially happen. And those are things that you want to look out for in the future to alleviate the problem if it did arise, which is why I'm kind of interested in watching the replay back on all of this.
And, you know, I think like the advice that Annette gave to Sarita would probably apply to you too, is just like start talking about, you know, I think this would really be important, why it's important for both of you, how it will, you know, enhance the communication, expectations, mutual commitment, and all those good things. And definitely consult an employment attorney or your association attorney to get you on the right foot as well in terms of the legalities of it, including your salary versus, you know, exempt versus non-exempt, all that good stuff. Okay.
And
The
NAR
only
just
other thing
came
on
out
that,
with their
Emily, when you talk
insurance,
about the attorneys,
sorry.
is make sure you have your own, because the association attorney is there to represent the organization and best interest of the organization. You need somebody that you can take it to on your end, just to make sure that everything is good.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And
Good point.
NAR just came out with a risk assessment from insurance as to what the associations are being sued for. And the number one is HR. And that might help open the dialogue. I provided it to my board of directors. Here's the report.
I
Just
think
for
that's
your
another,
review.
that's a great point to that, what this is why it's not all about me, it's about you too. It's about both of us, yeah. Okay, I know there's lots more that I wish we could talk about, that you wish we could talk about, that we couldn't get into today, but I hope this was helpful to get a perspective of these peers who are experienced in this and have kind of gone through some of the contract renewals and everything. So Peggy, I am gonna hand it back to you to close it up.
I just really want to thank everybody for being here. And I listened to everything and didn't think that anything that was said is anything that could incriminate anybody or whatever. I think this is going to be really useful for people who aren't here and don't know how to negotiate contracts or don't have contracts. 2 points that I wanted to reiterate that really hit home to me. And one was when Alicia said that her contract manages expectations for boards that change every single year. I think if you don't have a contract, that is a point that you would want to make when you're ready to, say that you want one, because I think it's important that people who come in that don't know anything, that there's rules set down about what you all do. The second thing was policy versus contract. And Tracy was the one who mentioned this, that if you don't want it to be something they can change on a whim, then put it in your contract instead of in policy, because they could change the policy. So I think those are two really important things. We will be processing this video to our YouTube channel, and I will get out the link to that to everybody who registered for this. Great panel. Emily, thank you as always. Great perspective on all of these. And to the panelists, I so appreciate your honesty in all of this, because I know it's a sensitive subject and you all had a lot to say and a lot of really great tips for everybody. And to everybody else who participated and all the great questions, thank you all also. So you are free to get on with your day, and expect later this afternoon that I will get back to you with a recap of this. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Happy
you.
AE Appreciation Day.
Happy